Hello everybody. This hasn't felt like the week for playing games or for recording podcasts about them. The comfort and the entertainment and the distraction that we get from games, and the comfort and the distraction and the entertainment that hopefully this podcast is capable of providing in turn, are privileges, and we're trying to be mindful of that fact. And we want to encourage anyone who enjoys the same privileges that we do to be mindful of it as well. We do have a podcast for you this week, and it will start in a couple of minutes. But before it does, there's a few things that we'd like to express. The first is that the Crate and Crowbar is donating £1,000 to the Black Lives Matter Global Network. Donations to Black Lives Matter are used to fight to end state-sanctioned violence, to liberate black people, and to end white supremacy. This is urgently necessary, it's long overdue, and we want to express our support for the movement and for the black communities and other marginalised people who are putting themselves at risk in the pursuit of justice and their fundamental human rights. We are also donating £1,000 to the Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust. The trust provides support to young people from disadvantaged backgrounds in the UK so that they can overcome discrimination and succeed in the careers of their choice. This is the first time that we've done something like this as the Crate and Crowbar, and we want to continue to find ways that we can use the podcast and our platform for good in the future. We have some ideas about this. We're looking into the particularities of implementing them, but we're very much open to your input and your feedback. And so if you have any ideas in this regard, you can contact us at contact@crateandcrowbar.com. There is also a lot we can do personally to become better informed, better educated on matters of racial injustice, and to advance anti-racist attitudes and anti-discriminatory attitudes in the parts of the games industry in which we each individually work. To that end, you will find a list of resources as well as causes you may wish to donate to in the show notes for this episode, which are available at crateandcrowbar.com. Otherwise, just stay safe and take care of one another. Thank you for listening. Hello and welcome to episode 236 of the Crate and Crowbar. It is the 4th of June 2020. My name is Chris Thurston, and joining me tonight are Marsh Davies.
Hello.
Tom Senior.
Hello.
A sparrow.
Which you can hear continuously peeping away. I think actually, I think it might be, you know, you get heart monitors in TV films about hospitals. I think this is measuring my sanity. And when it finally emits a long single tone, that will be when I've finally gone fucking insane.
Is it? You know, I know where you are because it's the house what I used to live in. Is it the top of the nest box outside your office window?
No, they've made a nest in the wisteria on the other wall.
That's even closer. They used to do this thing where they would just sit very fat on top of the nest box and yell.
Yeah.
In order to ward the birds off from their eggs. That's what that's called. We have some additional bird news regarding the podcast. I believe, Tom, you've got the latest on Alex.
Yeah, so I just wanted to check in with the status of valued pod member Alex Wiltshire, and I'm just going to relay to you the last two messages that he sent last night on Crate and Crowbar private Discord, and a lot of it is in all caps. I'm going to try and represent that emphasis. So, first message: crow fight outside. It's fucking mental out there, crows. That's the first message he sent. Then, like moments later, oh shit, they're coming back again. It's fucking crows. And we didn't hear from him for about 26 hours after those messages. So I was quite alarmed. I thought that maybe the crows got him, but he did respond today at 6 p.m. With the message "Dead of Crows," which, while sinister, suggests that he is still alive and reasonably happy.
I liked his pointed resistance at going for the obvious murder pun.
Yes, which is what I would have done for sure. But yeah, so Alex is doing well. He's battling the elements. He's battling nature. Nature is rising up, reclaiming its territory. Crow-based drama will continue in the coming months, I'm sure. I just thought I'd give everyone that little update.
It's always nice to have a story about birds.
Yes, it is. It is.
There's been some game announcements, some of them very unexpected. Who could have foreseen the return of Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning?
Yes!
In the year 2020, given the year that it is, possibly why not? It's true. Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning, the 2011 third-person looter basher RPG game, is back. THQ Nordic is republishing it as Kingdoms of Amalur Re-Reckoning.
You've got to really admire that they managed to make that name worse.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting because they picked, like, they could have picked any of those words to put "re" in front of, and it would be equally bad. It's interesting. But it's so a remastered version of Kingdoms of Amalur for some reason. Why not? And I was going to say, and who cares? But Tom, you care.
You see, I do care. I actually am strangely excited about this for some reason. This is for me, like, as a connoisseur of 6 out of 10 games, this is the ultimate one. This is the particular example of a sort of 6, 7 out of 10 game that's actually more fun than it should be. It's actually got like quite a fun combat system. It's trying to be an MMO because the development process behind that game is insane. Like the ins and outs of that development process are mad, and it's incredible that they produced any game at all. It doesn't need to be remastered at all. There's absolutely no need to remaster it. It's fine. It's a nice looking game. Like the textures don't need to be improved. But I am nevertheless, in a time of lockdown, I've been appreciating this sort of game. So I've been playing lots of what is it? The
Shadow of Mordor.
Oh, I've been playing loads of that, yes. But the definitive edition of Xenoblade Chronicles, that's it, on Switch. And that's very much kind of like mop up the map type RPG, and that's the sort of thing, along with Assassin's Creed Odyssey, that I've been really enjoying recently, just because I can listen to a podcast and just mop stuff up. It's time consuming and nice.
Interestingly, this game is being remastered by Keiko, which is the same company that did the Darksiders remasters.
Right.
And I feel like maybe you should work there.
Maybe I do, because I would have made the exact same decisions they've made.
Exactly.
I'm very happy personally.
I think you'd make an excellent marketing manager for them.
I'd be so enthusiastic about those games.
Exactly.
I'd really drive them forward, and knowing their faults and knowing how derivative and mediocre they are in many ways, nonetheless, they're very fun games. They're good.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's good for them, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose.
Just you didn't expect it. Maybe slightly more predictable. Total War Saga Troy was announced, which is, I think, the second Total War Saga game. Is that correct? I'm saying that in podcast voice.
Believe so. I think the first one was set in Britain.
Yeah.
And this is the second one they've done of these.
Yeah, so it's a smaller scale Total War game. A bit more focused, a bit more narrative. In this case, the Iliad. And it's got, like a lot of the, a lot of the presentation of this reminded me a lot of, just from the trailer, reminded me a lot of Total War Warhammer. And similar to that, it has, heroes and fantasy elements like minotaurs and other things that you put in ancient Greece games.
Now, what? Hang on, it has fantasy elements, does it? Minotaurs?
I believe so.
Oh, really?
What they've done is they're trying to sort of take a middle path and say that so minotaurs are units that are actually human. They're just very big men. So they're actually, what they're doing is they're trying to again with like the Trojan horse, for example, they're not actually going to do the literal Trojan horses in the legend. They're sort of looking at historical interpretations of what that might have actually meant in real life. So it might have been an earthquake, it might have been this, that, or the other. So they're trying not to make it explicitly fantasy, though it is hero focused.
Right.
But they're also trying to map a lot of that literature onto the units who are still human. They're not actually minotaurs.
I see.
They're just called that.
That immediately confused me because I saw greater focus on hero abilities and things, and Minotaurs and Cyclopses and just assumed Monster Town. But I'm sorry, I was completely wrong about that. They've taken the same approach that the start of Assassin's Creed Odyssey takes, I guess, where it's like, here's the Cyclops, he's just a dickhead.
Yes.
It's just a man who is a dickhead. There's no.
And then you shove his glass eye up the arse of a goat, and
I forgot that.
Best moment of that game.
Yeah.
It's really good. I really like it.
Any Total War thoughts? It feels like I'm surprised that it's not a subject that's been kind of done already. Really, it's such a kind of cornerstone of war literature and fantasy military storytelling. Like
I think so many ways. I've long felt that it's been the Iliad or just the Troy really has been calling out for a sort of like a Shadow of Mordor style stealth / action game where you're one of Odysseus's sneaky boys, sneaking into Troy and causing havoc within the walls and then trying to exfiltrate again. I think that would be good. That's not what this is. I don't know why I mentioned it, really.
They can't really do Assassin's Creed Iliad now, can they?
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah. I read a bit of Rock Paper Shotgun's preview of it, which is written by Nate, which is really good. But he calls out as a problem with the game, which does sound like a mechanical problem, that attention demanding heroes require a lot of micromanagement, which is like not news to Odysseus for He's like, fucking tell me about it, man.
That's on point though, right? That's good.
Yeah. Cool. Should we talk a little bit about what we've been playing this last couple of weeks?
Why not?
Marsh, would you like to go first?
Yeah, why not? I've been playing a game called Stoneshard, which I really want to like, but have been essentially rejected by. It's in early access, so there's a long way to go, I think. And to go by the Tom Francis certified taxonomy of games, it is a rogue like I would say, which is to say it's more roguey than some. In its moment-to-moment sort of actions. It's tile-based, for example, and every time you move a single tile or perform an action, everything else on the map then takes a moment to move or act. But it's also a lot more like the sort of grand RPGs in other regards. It's sort of this sprawling low fantasy world, which is really sumptuously pixel-arted up. I don't think it's proc-gen, at least I haven't encountered anything that feels that proc-gen. I haven't got into that many dungeons, so maybe there are proc-gen elements to them, but it feels like it's quite handcrafted. And there's this obsessive interest in detailed status effects. So your character can be wounded in about 50 fucking different ways, it feels. And each of these ways has their own repercussions and multi-stage fixes. And there's also like survival elements as well. I can't recall how pressing they were in the early rogue adjacent games. But you constantly have to top up with food and water and make sure you don't go insane. And the other thing that it sort of top line feature is that it's proudly difficult. It makes a big deal about how your character is no one special in this world, and they can be fucked up at any point by really anybody. That certainly proves to be true. But I just have this wariness of self-proclaimed difficult games, because it's really not hard at all to make a difficult game. You just and I feel. I mean, a lot of people do it by accident. I feel it can be a bit of a get out for developers who just fail to balance their games.
It's the get good thing, right? It's like, well, if you don't get it, get good.
Well, it inoculates them from criticism for sure. But also, I think it's a reason that the survival games in general proliferated a few years ago. When there was that big sort of Unity asset store boom of games game maker games, and people suddenly found the tools very accessible. But I think a lot of people didn't necessarily have design skills. But one sort of core loop that they could easily implement in the game was to have a health meter that just drops to 0 over time. Because that gives you a core loop, and it obviates any need for really thinking about late game or escalation or progression or balance and all these other things.
Right.
And I just don't find that loop especially interesting or nourishing. And I think the value of difficult games is in what failure teaches you. And I think for a lot of difficult games, they don't teach you very much at all. And like you say, the whole get good thing irks me as well. If something's like just opaque or unintuitive or poorly explained, then you can say it's intentional and it's not a shortcoming, it's a feature. But those are all my misgivings about difficult games. I don't know if Stoneshard is that kind of difficult game, but the fact that I don't know is because it is sufficiently difficult that I have not been able to interrogate its systems really at all properly. Like experimentation in the game just in 99% of cases leads to immediate death, or worse, a long drawn out death, which is nonetheless totally inevitable. Yeah.
What is the theme? Like, what's its sort of setup?
So it is this low fantasy world in which you are a mercenary, and the world has been at war for some time. The whatever long-term plot there is has not yet emerged during my playthrough. I'm just sort of in a village and going out of a village to do little sort of missions for the village elder. And I assume at some point I'll earn enough money to buy a cart, and then the story will progress to some other stage. But I haven't really got that far because it is just so difficult. I don't want to say that it wastes your time exactly, because it sort of dismisses many of the other qualities about the game that I really like. And like moment to moment, it's gorgeous to look at. And you are making interesting choices. And there is just richness to the simulation of your character and the world around you, which makes it a really interesting place. Like, you don't know what things are going to happen to you at any one point, and you don't know what consequences are going to fall out from them. But it does just fall back on just this unrewarding, sort of unenlightening punishment. And there's a really good example at the end of the tutorial, which I otherwise really like. It has a really good tutorial where it places you as a particular character, a character called Varen, who is this beaten-up old mercenary dude, who's been captured along with the rest of his party by creatures, let's say, which have taken over this dilapidated monastery. And it's this really cool and atmospheric sequence in which you break out of prison and then try to escape. And the story of the monastery is quite deftly delivered, even if it isn't like some groundbreaking work of fantasy fiction. But it climaxes in this boss battle, which is surprisingly elaborate. It's more like a Dark Souls boss battle than something you might expect from a roguelike. And it took me quite a few goes just to figure out what to do. There's like an initial phase which is almost like a puzzle solving phase, and then there's a secondary phase which is just a pure combat phase. But even that combat phase is interesting because it's much more about positioning than like an exchange of stats. This creature will fuck you up if it gets close to you. It also performs this really telegraphed dash move that you can move out of. And it also conjures this sort of AoE curse effect, which is sort of more or less in front of it. And that's really hard to avoid because you can only move one tile at a time, and the AoE effect is only telegraphed one turn in advance, so it could just be bigger than the area that you can move out of. So you almost inevitably get cursed at some point in this drawn-out battle. But you can't exchange blows with this thing. It will just wreck you. So it's clearly a ranged fight. But your character doesn't have really any ranged abilities at all. I mean, he does have a bow, but he can't fucking shoot it properly. He's got the point where I started the battle, I had 22 arrows, and I fired every single one of those arrows and didn't hit a single one. And I think the game is making like this point that you aren't exceptional in any way. And you may just encounter things that are difficult or beyond your ability. But what it means in practice is that you just have to go around and pick up your arrows again and again and again while dodging all the attacks. And if you're cursed as well, then you're even less likely to land an arrow blow. And so by the time I've sort of figured out how to avoid his attacks, I'm already like double cursed and horribly mauled. And I somehow kind of like persevere, boringly traipsing round and pick up all the arrows again and again. And periodically, you know, I do land a shot. And eventually I get this fucker down to a tiny sliver of health. And one more arrow, just need one more arrow to kill him. I'm also nearly dead. He'll just hit me one more time and I'll die. So he puts down his dash move, and I move out the way. But because I'm cursed and have a status effect, my character decides to move in the opposite direction, into the line of fire, and I die.
Oh, God.
And it's just like, okay, start again. And like, okay, so, you know, obviously I'm biting my hand and screeching in frustration, temporarily silencing the sparrows with my rage. But... And I guess it like teaches you about status effects and how deleterious they can be. But what was the point of me then doing it all again? You know, I've already learnt the lesson. It doesn't feel like that was an enriching punishment in any way. And because it wasn't even my fault. I did the right thing and the game decided it was going to play for me and do the wrong thing. And I just don't know what you get from that really. But that's just a little taste of what's to come. Because outside that tutorial, I don't know how you survive a single fucking encounter. Like, you don't play as Varen from then. Varen retires and becomes the guy who recruits your new character, which is kind of cool.
Right.
But it's still, I don't know if this is going to be true in the full game. But at the moment, you just choose from a selection of predefined characters. And then you tutor out into the world and get killed by wolves, it seems. And like one wolf you can just about kill, but it will horribly wound you. But two, no chance. And there's always more than one, as far as I can tell. But the thing is, even being wounded in the game is just like a huge problem. Because while you can treat wounds, the process is incredibly resource-hungry and elaborate and time-consuming. It involves bunches of different ingredients and rest. And then if you rest, then there's knock-on effects of hunger and thirst. And then you need to manage your pain. And you don't necessarily have the resources to deal with being even slightly wounded at the beginning of this game. And yet, being wounded just makes you less able in every way, in a really dramatic ways. So like some injuries, not even especially serious ones, will give you a chance to stumble every time you move. And if you stumble and fall, you take more damage. And so what this means in practice, I mean, you can say like, oh, well, that's so realistic. How interesting that they've managed to put something so granular and realistic in the game. But what it means is that you just can't click more than 2 squares away from you. Because if you move 2 squares and it does a dice roll in between the movement of those 2 squares, you won't have a chance to stop and prevent yourself from stumbling and falling. And it just being even slightly injured puts you into this deep nosedive that is almost impossible to pull out of, as far as I can tell. Like, I just don't know what's especially interesting about it. Like, I don't know. I'm really flummoxed because there's so much to recommend the game in other ways, and you can see that they've really thought about a lot of the kind of stats underpinning this stuff and how they interact with each other. But it's just like I'm being slapped down for doing what I think is not especially wildly stupid stuff. Why is it hurting me? Is my question, I guess.
So it sounds like you're not supposed to go outside the village, right? Like it sounds like you're supposed to stay in the village forever or for a couple of hours, you know what I mean? Until you can, do you have, but are you following, I know maybe it's not the right word, but is there a sense of a critical path that you are following or not following? Like,
yes. I mean, you're told, go to the village elder. The tooltip is go to the village elder that's on your screen until you go to the village elder. And you have a choice of 2 missions, both of which involve going out to the village and dying instantaneously. So I did look for advice on the internet, as we call it, as to what to do. And well, so here's the other thing about difficult games is that they attract a certain kind of player, who is a cunt, frankly. And the forums are just full of people offering really unhelpful advice and sneering at anybody who doesn't instantaneously know what to do. But I wrote down some of their little tips, which I should preface by saying none of them work, as far as I can tell. So one of the first things you need to do, I mean, it's obvious, really. It's obvious. I mean, in every game you need to do this when you set out, is to rob the army barracks. You need to, the first thing you do is to go into the army barracks, just go into the garrison, go into their armory, and just take everything. Nobody will question you. There's no repercussion for that. Just take what you want and sell the rest. This doesn't work entirely because the implication is that you get better weapons for doing this, but actually the weapons you have are better than all of this stuff. But you can make a small amount of money, a very small amount of money, from selling the entire army's supply of weaponry to the vendor who is literally outside the garrison building. But I mean, that's obvious. Everybody would go for that. So that's fine. You should also take off your metal armor and trash it and replace it with leather armor, which is, as far as I can tell, a bad idea because it's worse. Also, you can't afford it. There's plenty of stuff on the internet suggesting how you get prepared. All of this stuff involves buying things, and you can't afford to buy any of the things.
Is that why you sell all the stuff from the armory?
Yeah, but I sold all the stuff from the armory, and I was able to buy one healing potion. So I don't know that it's that cost-effective a method to get ahead. Then you need to sleep, because obviously this is what you do at the beginning of every quest: is you sleep because that's the only way to save. And then you can set out on your quest. You should avoid roads, which is actually that's kind of a sensible one in that is sort of in the fiction that you don't tread and go along the roads because that's where the bandits are. But the bandits aren't the problem. The wolves are the problem. And the wolves aren't on the roads. They're everywhere else. You should always travel diagonally. I mean, obviously. You should go hunting. No suggestion of how you successfully hunt anything because your character can't hit anything with a bow. And you move at the same speed as every other animal. So you can't chase anything down or ever hit it. So yeah, thanks internet for those tips.
Stoneshard.
Well, I want somebody just to tell me what to do because I feel like I've done my duty. Really, I'm not being impatient with it or done things that I think are unintuitive. I just have no idea what I'm meant to be doing.
I mean, so much like you've endured Dark Souls 2 with me and 4 Kings with Rich Stanton. And those that's a matter of public record on our YouTube channel, in fact. Indeed. So the fact that you had the patience for those escapades and not this one does say a lot about the game, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, in Dark Souls, I mean, actually, to be fair, I did bounce straight off Dark Souls the first time. Because I wasn't convinced that its punishment of me was going to lead to some reward or greater insight. But it does in Dark Souls. In fact, struggle is so integral to its larger message and philosophy. I mean, just in one of the ways in which it rewards you, that it is well worth persisting. But in this, and this is the problem with difficult games is that there are so many games out there that I think it's unwise of developers to put those roadblocks up because you need you just can't as a random player trust that the developer will have something interesting to say once you've pushed through the difficulty. Like you've got to meet people halfway, really. It's my feeling, but
I think you're absolutely right at the start of this with the Unity sort of initial wave of Unity game analogy that it's a great way to cover for not having a lot of content. You know, make the content you do have very hard to access. It's a cheap way of achieving that. But it sounds like there's quite a lot of, obviously this game isn't finished yet, but it does sound like there's been quite a big investment in the world and the systems and things. And if that is true and there's stuff to discover and value in discovering it, then it does make sense to lower the barrier to accessing that stuff, right? No one's going to be super annoyed if they kind of blitz through everything that's there in a couple of hours if they were a fun couple of hours. depending on price and expectation and stuff. But you know what I mean? Like, it's the only real case for that is if this is a ultimately like minuscule demo and there's really nothing beyond that initial challenge or something like that.
Yeah, I really don't know, because the reviews I've read notably only have screenshots up to the point where I am.
No one's gotten past that.
I don't know. I mean, maybe. Who could say? Anyway, I may come back to it at a later date when I think some of these things may have been addressed, or I get advice on how to proceed. Because I do think there's something there, but fuck knows where or how I get to it.
What have you been up to, Tom?
So I want to talk about two games. One very briefly, just to start with, which is a game called Sludge Life, which is a first-person game about doing graffiti on buildings that are submerged in a sludge, because the sort of corporate structure that sustains this economy has broken down, and now like everything's literally going to shit. And the fun thing about this is that, first of all, it's just a very surreal kind of lo-fi world to explore. There's not much to the game. Like, you just you pull out your camera and you see where you can actually put your spray your tag. But the best thing about it is just the NPC dialogue that you get as you kind of explore. So like, there's one guy, for example, you're at this basketball court, and you can actually play with basketball. It's a physics object. You can put it through the hoop. Then you go across this guy on the side, and he says to you, "I sprained both my ankles last week downloading this huge file, so I got to lay low." And it's full of this like extremely good, quirky dialogue. There's a sort of nihilism running through it, but quite a warm sense of nihilism. Everyone is giving up on their job. Everyone knows that they're sort of like, their city is fucked. But they have very, very funny things to say about it. So you could go to like a frog man, and he'll tell you about like how he used to smoke but doesn't anymore. It's kind of
Okay.
it's just really it's just a really fun world to be in, even though it's quite a miserable place. So I think, like, as a thing to explore in this current time, I found it kind of weirdly refreshing, in that we're all like very sad and disappointed about the way the world is in many ways at the moment, and then there are all these kind of like quirky characters who are as well, but they sort of put it into very, very very funny dialogue, just funny sort of like dialogue chains. So yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out to Sludge Life, particularly because it's free on the Epic Games Store for a year. So if you want to go play this, you can just go onto the Epic Games Store, just get it, and it's yours, and just enjoy that. Yeah, so I want to give that a shout out. The other game I've been playing is Receiver 2 from Wiltshire Games. I believe the first game came out of a game jam, I think. And
right.
the thing that really... So it's a first-person sort of roguelike, really. It's a shooter, but it's very, very obsessed with guns as mechanical objects. Like, there are like many, many buttons you need to press to reload a weapon. So we in games we're used to just pressing R, and your character just sort of does all the stuff that reloads the gun. Whereas in this, depending on the weapon, there are many different kind of rituals for reloading. Where you might have to take out a clip, press Z a load of times to put like bullets into the clip, then whack it back in. And there's an extraordinary level of attention to detail in the way that these weapons are modelled, the way that they fire, and indeed in the sort of flavour text that is attached to each one of them. To the extent that the first two guns you get, one's just a standard revolver, a Smith & Wesson, and the second one is a detective revolver, which was basically a snub-nosed version of the same weapon designed for detectives who wanted to have concealed firearms. And the flavour text obsesses over the fact that one barrel turns clockwise, but in the snub-nosed version it turns anti-clockwise. And that matters because certain chambers are blocked, so you have to know where the bullets are and what you're actually about to shoot.
Jeez.
And when you actually, incredibly, when you pop out the chamber, the way you can tell whether a bullet has been fired is because you see a dent in the back of every single shell that has been actually shot where the hammer hit it, and that's the level of attention to detail. It's absolutely like incredibly obsessed with guns, but at the same time, it's also very uncomfortable with guns. And this is, I think, this is just like sort of loads of interesting stuff to explore with Receiver 2 because you go to the flavor text, and each description of a weapon is written as though it's the biggest sort of hobbyist enthusiast writing about that particular weapon. And so the first thing you read about the revolver, for example, the Smith & Wesson, it's like, this is way better than automatic handgun because XYZ. But then when you read the automatic handgun description, it says, oh, this is way better than revolvers because of XYZ. And it's a kind of like a Top Gear level of obsession with these things as machines, which I think is like very, very deliberate. I think that, and like, I think this is interesting. It's particularly as like a British guy who, in our country, like guns aren't accessible. Like they're not a thing, apart from cops and here and there. But so to actually like, but they are fascinating machines, and like there is like, it's interesting to explore that interest, like kind of that interest in the mechanisms and the way that these things work, and the sort of power they have. But at the same time, you only ever shoot machines in this game. You never shoot people. So you go in and you're taking out turrets, and they make that interesting because the turrets, depending on where you hit them, it has different effects. So I like to shoot them in the ammo loader at the back, which is a box behind the actual gun. And when you do that, you can actually go up, and they can't fire because they're out of bullets, and you actually pick up the bullets off the floor and reload your weapon. But you can also shoot out the sensor that detects you, and that has a different effect. Or you can straight up disable it with a really good shot to the base of the turret. So they've made even a static enemy very interesting, made more interesting by the fact you have to manage these weapons, manage your guns in such a kind of precise way. And then at the same time as all of that, there's a real fear of guns in the lore and the stuff that you pick up. And it's going to get a bit heavy, so apologies. But there's something in the story called The Threat, capital T, capital T. And there's a series of kind of like diary entries that talk about the threat and how to defend against it. And they say, oh, this is the thing that could sort of come over you at any moment and change your behavior. And so there's loads of like gun safety stuff in there. So they say, okay, so the threat might come over you for 5 minutes. That's why you need to put a gun in a box, unload it, put the ammo somewhere else, and lock it in a closet every time after you've used it, in case the threat strikes. And that's for the protection of you and your family. And the strong implication is that it's basically a game that is obsessed with the mechanism of guns and how interesting they are, but also deeply fearful of, for example, suicide impulses or homicidal impulses that might strike briefly and cause you to do something terrible with a gun that's in your house. And it's a deliberate and very definite tension within the game, given how obsessive it is about the weapons, but also how scared the game is of the weapons, and the fact that you only use them on machines and never on people. I think it's a fascinating thing, really.
That's really interesting. I was wondering where you were going with that, and then it's like, because I played a lot of the first Receiver, and because it seemed like it emerged from a jam, it feels kind of tech demo-y in some ways.
Yeah,
it definitely has this ambivalence to it, like this sci-fi, like this very empty feeling world. Everything else is a drone. Everything that isn't you is a drone, and really you are just a kind of floating gun. But also you die instantly from any shot to you, and so there is this, again, I think you're right, like fear of the thing, and also kind of fascination with it. I think that's such a, like, I'd be interested, like, where are you? I mean, it sounds convincing from the description of the whole that the writing in the game is ironic, or it's intended that way. How heavily does it land on that point? You know, is it obviously satirical, or is it more just enthusiastic for guns in the way that some people are, and you only get the sense of irony from its context?
Yeah. So I think the people who've created this have a definite hobbyist enthusiasm for those weapons. Definitely. Like, I don't think you could write that flavor text behind each gun, which is like, it's incredibly informative and like well written and just like really interesting to read, actually, to be honest. I think that's how like it sort of tricks you into sort of being enthusiastic about these weapons, particularly because the mechanics actually force you to engage with every single mechanical motion you need to do with these things to actually get them to work. And there's a real enthusiasm and love for it, but also a huge, enormous recognition that they're dangerous and horrible. Which I don't know. I think you'd have to dig in and actually read all the text to get that. I'm not sure you just get that naturally from playing the game. And in fact, playing the game itself is quite frustrating, and the way it's structured is quite irritating. Just purely because of the way its objectives are structured. So you'll be in this kind of obscure urban environment, and you've got to find 5 cassettes, and these things are tiny. So you're sort of like, it's a needle and haystack type search. And as you go through, you need to like get rid of turrets so you can actually access new areas. Or you have to go on a sound cues. If you're near a tape, you'll hear music. But it's so irritating. And a mission is basically like, find 5. It's like, I don't want to. It's really annoying.
Yeah.
And each time you find one, you get some an obscure voiceover about what you as a receiver are. There's something called the mind kill, which is never quite explained yet. I feel like it buries its themes a bit too much. I think like if you don't go into that flavor text and kind of feel that the conflict there between the enthusiasm for guns and the fear of guns, I don't think you quite get the game. But I still find it nevertheless fascinating.
It's kind of interesting, like, because I was going to say, like, do you think someone who, because you said that you approach this in the same way that I approach the first receiver, and Graham has talked a lot about receiver in the past as well, where we bring tons of baggage with us, like, naturally, you can't avoid it, right? Like, both ignorance of these devices, a lack of first-hand experience of them, you know, like, so there's a novelty there. And also probably a predisposition to be suspicious of them. And I wonder what you think the impression of the game would be from someone who arrives at it from a completely different gun culture, like, you know, an American gun culture, for example, where it's possible to... Well, what happens if you play this game and you are simply a fan? Do you think you'd be challenged?
I don't think you would, based on what I've played. That's a really good question. I think you just enjoy the mechanisms and how well they're modelled, and not necessarily actually experience the anxiety behind it. But that anxiety is definitely there. But again, like as you say, as a British citizen, where we just don't have a gun culture like that, there is a kind of a predisposition to find that subtext in a way that perhaps doesn't exist in other cultures, for sure.
Because like your description of it made it sound like a horror game. Like, you know, there's something really unsettling about all the implications of that. But it's fascinating that it's simply because it's interactive and not didactic. That horror game could just be a fun hobbyist experience for somebody else with a different set of biases. Mm-hmm. Like, that's such an interesting thing about games, I think, that, you know, I think there's a much bigger debate somewhere lurking around here, which is that, like, games can track in ambivalence really, really in a very sophisticated way, and often do, in order to not have to say anything about anything. But you know, this is always really interesting to hear about, because it almost sounds like studied ambivalence in some ways, like letting the audience make up their own mind and discover the danger and kind of fear of these objects. But also, what if you just don't say anything, and therefore no one walks away with you haven't expressed a message, you haven't made a judgment? Yeah,
because the tapes that you discover is such vague bullshit about being a receiver, and it's nonsense. Like the best writing is in all the descriptions of stuff. So it's not putting its themes forward. It's not like I think you're right. It's a deliberate ambivalence, so that, you know, people who just love a good gun, and I do too, in a game, could just enjoy it on that basis, which is of course like a good marketing decision as well, I suppose.
Right. Yeah.
But I find this game much more honest about guns than something like Call of Duty where they make deals with arms makers to put their products in their games and that kind of stuff. I'd much prefer this approach to it, where it's like, yeah, these things are fascinating actually. Like, let's be honest about that. These are fascinating machines, and we can explore every sort of like movement that you need to do to operate them. But also, let's also think about why they're how terrifying they are. And when you fire a shot in this game, it's the loudest fucking thing. Like every shot you fire, it's so loud, it's so kind of devastating, a massive kick, and that's all been carefully studied. But I think that's quite powerful. I think that's a deliberate part of the message it's trying to get across.
Yeah, it's so. Sorry, Marsh, you gonna say?
Oh well, I was wondering if you thought that you could still have this sort of tactile mechanical experience of a similar kind, which wasn't about guns.
Yeah.
Because obviously there is like an interaction element with your environment there, which guns immediately suggest. You know, being in line of sight of something and the spatial positioning you need to evade something and then also attack it is an interesting thing. But in terms of being able to manipulate a device that you have in your hand in a really detailed way, that feels like something that could be done in some other domain than gun wank.
yeah. That's completely true. And when the example that springs to mind is actually Alien Isolation, where you have these awesome machines that you use to unlock doors, and you have to like press buttons to sort of like tap buttons and then crank it and then move it and then gradually unlock it, and that is super satisfying. It is really good. And you're right, like maybe I'd love to see more of that sort of thing.
Tell you what just popped into my head, but Mirror Moon, which I remember talking about on the podcast many years ago now, maybe like in the when the podcast was merely in its teens even. That's a game about exploring planets and using these bizarre cartography tools to work out where you are and how to get to where you need to go. And I can't remember exactly how detailed your interaction with those things is, but I mean that's exactly what this game could be if it took away the actual gun shooting part.
It feels like the first Receiver, at least, like was novel and you know, and in its kind of it felt like an interesting direction to take the FPS in, right? Like its fundamental assumptions, I think, are that guns are a game thing, right? Other connotations notwithstanding, and they pulled one part of that far closer to reality than it had ever been, or that I had ever experienced in a game. Almost as an experiment. Like, is an FPS playable if you actually have to think about all the mechanisms in play, and maybe not tremendously interrogating the implications of guns beyond that, right? They are mechanically in games a useful way to have the player express their intent into an environment. You know, it's like there's a reason it's a portal gun in Portal, and it's because that's the most intuitive way to say, I would like there to be a portal there. Yeah. And I understand what's happening, and I understand the logic of what happens when I click the mouse button and something emits from my character. It's a useful metaphor in that sense. And it just enters such strange territory, which I think we are also becoming far more aware of the issues with, of, you know, at that point it will never just be a useful metaphor for video games, because they're ultimately going to be, and you know, direct analogies for real life devices that really have a single purpose, and that's to kill people and animals. So, you know, it's really interesting to like try and assess the sort of, again, the correct way to go about interrogating their role in FPS. It's like the way I would put this, and I appreciate this is a bit of a ramble, but you know, I think the fact that Receiver can be just a sort of interesting thing, partly because, as you said, Tom, you're using these devices to dismantle other devices. Right? Yeah, you're learning the anatomy of these turrets and taking them apart. Whereas if you were fighting or firing at believable characters in that game, then it would have a completely different message. It wouldn't be able to avoid having a different message. And so the question is, is the fact that you're fighting robots in a lonely street also an act of ambivalence, or is it a kind of, an atmospheric flourish? Like it's so complicated. Like where that enters, I think, is a piece of art basically, and I think it exists on the axis of like if this makes you feel a certain way effectively, then I think it probably does function as art, like the discomfort that you're describing. But it's very rare that you could find a piece of art that could also be interpreted by someone else as a toy that supports the opposite view.
Mm. Yeah, there's certainly a sense that if you're going to be like uncharitable, interpret it in an uncharitable way, in that is like having it both ways, where you get to do the hobbyist stuff, you get to love guns, but you don't have to deal with any of the actual consequences of what guns do because you're just shooting pieces of shit, which is, I think I'd give it a bit more credit than that. I think because I think it doesn't want to make people miserable. It's weird. Like this is also like going even deeper into what games are actually for. I think like the way people approach games, that they want to play a game to be entertained and ultimately feel powerful or have fun. And so to actually come out of a game feeling miserable is just not the same. So I'd go in and watch a movie. I'd watch like Requiem for a Dream and be like, oh, that was fucking horrible, but I'm glad I watched it. That doesn't exist for games, I don't think. So if they were to actually put people in it and sort of try to make a point about guns in that way, I just think it wouldn't be a viable product. That's a horrible way to put it.
Yeah, well,
but you know what I mean?
Absolutely right. Like, its context is always going to be Steam, right?
Yeah,
and it's always going to be sat next to, I don't know, Destiny and Hunt Showdown, just to talk about games that I play, both of which involve shooting things, and both of which couch those things in just enough fantasy to turn it into something that I don't associate with the real world or the real world consequences of those devices, right? Like they abstract all of the different elements of that, the real, all of the different, real things that are going on there, and obviously Hunt is also explicitly just unpleasant to be in. You know what I mean? Sure. In every possible way, except it being a good game. And so it's always going to be presented in entertainment context. We don't have the same set of kind of cultural approaches to games where it's like cinemas are not a culturally neutral space by any means, but we kind of accept that they can contain anything from art cinema to horror movies to kids movies to blockbuster movies, and the audience is maybe multiple audiences are expected for one thing, and audiences are expected to kind of have a sense of what particular thing they're looking for when they go in. Whereas I'm not sure that games, the places where you get games are necessarily even organized in that way or approached in that way, which is kind of an interesting problem for anything like this. Like, I think if you put Receiver in an art gallery, you inevitably get a different take on it.
That's a really good point, actually. Yeah, but I think the way it was released was weird as well, because it was sort of announced a week before and then suddenly came out. And then lots of people have played it and really enjoy it because it is a good game. But I feel like they had an opportunity to say more with that idea.
Yeah.
Than they necessarily do. It feels like there's definitely an intelligence behind that game that I feel should be more exposed in its presentation to everyone, rather than being a thing that you sort of find for yourself. But I guess that's the nature of games as well, is that you have to dig into every aspect of the game to actually discover what it's trying to say. I'm looking forward to playing more. I mean, again, it's annoying as a game. As a sort of games critic, brain says, the repetitive going through the same environments to find these tiny cassette tapes is irritating. But these the weapons themselves and the way that they're kind of realized and the way that the game talks about those, I think is fascinating.
Can I bring about a kind of tonal whiplash here by talking about sharks?
Sharks! Yes.
Aren't they really nature's gun?
Well, basically. So I actually I played and completed Tripwire Interactive's Maneater, which came out a couple of weeks ago now. And I think I played and completed it. It would have had played it and completed it in time for last week's podcast. So forgive me, some of this is a little shaky. I went back to it today to kind of refresh my feelings on it. Maneater, so Tripwire are the people who made Killing Floor, which was the kind of Left 4 Dead game that had many of its own qualities and was very, very popular. They've made this single-player open-world shark game, and it's so deeply 6 out of 10 that I was actually a little bit worried when you said you were going to be on the podcast, Tom, because I assumed you had played it and know everything about it. So I'm actually kind of delighted that you haven't played it yet, but it should be on your list.
Excellent.
I have fond feelings about it, but I kind of want to articulate what it is because I find it kind of interesting. And I think part of its appeal for me is nostalgia. What it feels like more than anything else is like a first generation launch Xbox 360 game. The production values are obviously higher than that. It looks modern in a lot of ways, but it has that exact feel of like, we have one high concept and not a ton of money, and we're going to make something that you should probably rent from old Netflix when they would mail you a game in a little envelope, like back in the olden days.
I remember those days.
It is, it's so sort of like, it has one thing, which is you're going to be a big shark and you're going to munch things, and it spins us out over an open world with sort of templated activities in the way that open worlds often are now. Like each little zone has its own things to do, and it's the same set of things to do in every zone. And then there's a story that weaves through these zones, and things to collect and things to 100%. But unlike any other game with the structure, any Assassin's Creed game, you can 100% the whole thing in like 9 or 10 hours. Like, it's not very big. Like, I think I finished it in 6. And that's what I think locates it in this perfect rental territory, as does its overall feeling of like light cheapness. It feels efficiently project managed in a way that I appreciate, but sort of like keeps its scope within a very, very specific set of experiences. And I'll talk about what they are. Tonally, it is a bit like, imagine this scenario. You have just finished your dream game, and it is 3D, beautiful 3D Echo the Dolphin. Okay. And so then you take this game to the publisher and you explain what it is, and the publisher's not sure, and the publisher knows that GTA Vice City has just come out or something like that. And can you make it more like that? And maybe also the publisher's kids, and this is breaking the timeline a bit, the publisher's kids are really into Deadpool. And could you take your undersea oceanic adventure wildlife game and maybe see if there's any way this could be like Deadpool? And that's what they've made. And Maneater is the game you get out of that process. It has the very specific energy, I think, of like a noughties BMX game, but you are a shark. And that, I think, has an interesting relationship with its sort of slight feeling of cheapness and the fact that it's pretty 6 out of 10, because you in a very different context of the discussion we were just having, the first thing is like, is this deliberately ironic or not? Like, is this maybe the world's first ironic 6 out of 10? Because actually, the other side of it is it plays into that in some really fun ways. The premise of the game is that you are watching one of those really bad American wildlife shows, not like deep, like Planet Earth or something like that, but like one of those like kind of trashy, like Deadliest Catch type, extreme reused footage of Alaskan men falling off boats shows. This is a bit of an aside, but I once stayed with a friend at Columbia University in the US, and he couldn't fall asleep unless he was listening to Deadliest Catch really loudly. And I slept under a table in his little like room at Columbia, and he was like, "Is it okay if I put something on so I can go to sleep?" And like the first thing is like this deafening crashing wave, and then like, "If they don't get this haul in, all 6 of these men will die." And it only got more extreme from there. And the catch is only more deadly. It basically has this energy. It's set in like a GTA-ified Louisiana. GTA-ified the fact it's a fictional city, but it's basically New Orleans, but it's also much more of a mishmash of different, American things. It's only, in the Southeast, got a bit of Florida to it as well. And And it is this, a bit like GTA as well, it's this horrible world of decrepit, indolent human dipshittery, basically, where the bayou and the bay and the ocean itself is just full of human garbage, and it's awful and shit. And you are this sort of like edgy, noughties punk shark of like eco-vengeance. And the game begins with, but the notion is that there's a camera crew following one particular shark hunter called Scaly Pete. In the beginning of the game, you play as an adult bull shark who you learn the controls, which I'll get into the mechanics in a minute, but you learn the controls and then you fall afoul of Scaly Pete. And this is spoilers for the first 10 minutes of the game, but he murders this shark who turns out to be your mother, and rips a bull shark pup out of her carcass. That bull shark pup, which is you, then bites his hand off and dives into the bayou, and then you're a baby shark, making your way in the world and getting bigger by eating things until you can go into a series of boss fights with this man and his boat and his son. And it occasionally cuts back to these, like, possibly better acted than they should be cutscenes, which are then episodes of the show, which start with, like, it's kind of funny, this guy's extremely extreme. It's all very turned up to 11. And then, towards, in the second half of the game, it has the camera crew genuinely worried about this person's actions and state, and it's kind of very, very strange. The other thing about it that sells this is when you are the shark, and you are the shark the rest of the time, the narrator of the TV show is still present. And the narrator is played by Chris Parnell, who is done tons of comedy, American comedy, TV and cartoons. He's Dr. Spaceman from 30 Rock, and he's in Archer and Family Guy and American Dad, I think. Tons of those sorts of things. Rick and Morty. He's the dad in Rick and Morty as well, I think. And so it's got that particular kind of... This is where the Deadpool thing comes in, I think. That sort of, sardonic sense of humour, which can grate because I think it's very of a particular type of humour, which I think if I just said 30 Rock, Family Guy, maybe not 30 Rock, Family Guy, Rick and Morty, then you'll know where that is. But some of it is genuinely funny. And it works quite well alongside what I would say is the GTA-inspired grotesque depiction of humanity. In fact, it's a device that almost adds a bit of warmth and consistency to that, from just the voice of the game standpoint. Like, GTA asks you to understand that the houses are being ironic or something like this. This makes it very, very clear, and also you're a shark. And that is also expressed through, like, for some reason you can hear the radio of shark hunters that get sent after you, and they're all idiots, basically. And the game sort of sets you up to go on these shark rampages, and actually Rampage would also be one of its influences, I think. Like, it's a monster movie, and you are the monster, and that's kind of the thrill of it. And it sets up the fact that you're munching. Like, there would be an interesting horror game to make out of Jaws, essentially, to make out of the premise of being this sort of stalking killer where just from a fictional point of view, where every kind of death that you inflict is serious and the result of a lot of planning. This isn't that. This is a game where you can surge out of the sea into a beachside rave, and flop on your belly around the rave, just munching person after person after person after person to hit a tally before leaping back into the sea and getting some points. You can also, the way the controls work is you're swimming around in 3D under the water, and then when you're on the surface, you move a bit faster and your fin is at the top of the water. You can jump out of the water. You have a dodge move with an invincibility frame, which is used for evading gunfire, harpoons fired by scuba divers, the attacks of other predatory animals. And you also have like limited ability to survive on land, which you can upgrade. I'm going to talk about shark upgrades in a minute because we're going some places for this. And you can you have a tail swipe stun attack, which is mostly useful when fighting other creatures, but can be upgraded to let you knock people off boats. The other way it works is so you bite something. It's not like attack is an action, bite is kind of the action. So you press the right trigger to bite, and it's definitely a pad game. And if you tap it, you'll just do a chomp. If you hold it, you'll bite and hold whatever that thing is. And if this is something that's substantially weaker than you, you can then thrash it by waggling the stick to like shake it about and try and kill it. Or you can keep munching by hammering the trigger. And then sometimes if you're fighting another creature, particularly that is about the same power as you, you have to wait for like them to have like to be in like the weak part of their attack animation. It's got like fighting game mechanics in there, like shark fighting. So if they're in the weak part of the animation, they globally free. And if you grab them, then you can actually grab them and thrash them. But otherwise, you've just got to fight and dodge. You can also, and there are gameplay mechanics built around this. You can also, once you've got something in your mouth and you've grabbed it, if it's a human, it will drown if you're under the water. So and if it finishes drowning and dies, you'll instantly eat it for health and XP and minerals, which you can spend on shark upgrades, which I'll get to.
Oh my god!
If it's but while you've got something in your mouth, you can also leap out of the water, and if you use the tail attack, the tail bash button, while you're out of the water and you have something in your mouth, you enter bullet time. And when you're in bullet time, you can then use the cursor to smart target whatever's in your mouth at something else in the environment, drop it, and baseball smash it with your tail. And so, you know, to give you an example of where this escalates, like it has a GTA-style wanted system. If you start attacking humans, shark hunters will come, and the shark hunters will chase you in boats. And if you then build up it has a nice way of making that rewarding. If you build up the shark wanted meter enough, it's like a level. It's more like XP. It's like an XP bar and a wanted meter. If you get it to the top, a named character will come to join the hunt. And if you can kill them, you get an upgrade and you progress, and there are 10 of them, and that gets you to the maximum wanted level. And you can also run away and hide, and if they lose track of you, they'll call off the search. You know, and so I remember like towards the end of the game, sometimes these get quite tricky. It's not a hard game. I died twice in 6 hours. I did all of it almost on autopilot, and it was quite pleasant for that. But like I prepared for quite a significant encounter with one of these far more better armed shark hunting patrol boats by diving into the ocean, finding a turtle, swimming at it, and then diving out of the sea, battering the turtle directly into the pilot of a boat, which knocks him into the sea, which means the boat now can't move, which means I can activate my shark ult. And I want to... And so you upgrade your shark. Your shark has equipment, and the equipment can be upgraded. And it even has the World of Warcraft traditional system of rarity. But because this is a game of modest scope, there are only 3 armor sets in the game. And really, you'll only get 2 of them, because 2 of them are kind of unlocked along the critical path and the regular activities, and one of them, the Shadow Shark set, requires you to go to do some of the kind of stuff finding mini activities around the world, and who can be asked. So you basically have essentially 2 parallel progressions. So you have, actually, I want to say first that you have passive shark upgrades that you can plug in, and these are things like becoming more amphibious, and that means you can flop around on golf courses for longer, killing people, or moving faster, or gaining a boost when you're low on health, or getting more minerals from the things you eat, which is, you know, these are just playstyle builds, basically. And then you have this, your equipment: head, fins, body, tail, jaws. And these are in sets, like I say. And I think one of its weaknesses is the set bonuses are so good that you pick one, and they're basically just playstyles, really. You don't mix and match. And the primary 2 are the bone shark and the bioelectric shark. And I fully unlocked both and fully upgraded both. But I stuck with the bone shark. And once you equip the body from a particular set, that gives you the shark ult for that set. The bone shark, you basically get covered in like keratin armor, essentially, and it upgrades your bite. It does things like when you dive out of the water and into the water, it creates a kind of damaging shockwave and things like this. Your tail bash knocks people off boats more often. And then you gain this ult where your entire body becomes encased in bone. And when you do your regular speed dash, you actually become more like a spinning, barrel rolling shark drill bit that can just annihilate boats from below. And like, there's a particular satisfaction in like, you'll be going around, and even if you're not in a fight, your ult will charge up because it charges when you eat things. And you'll see just like a little flamingo pedal boat out on the lagoon, and you just fucking annihilate it. People go flying, this screaming. It's very, very silly. The reason I preferred this one to the bioelectric one is the first upgrade you get for the bioelectric tree is it turns your dodge with, you know, the shark dodge with the iframe into a teleport where you turn into lightning and surge through the ocean and appear somewhere else. And the bioelectric shark ult encases you in lightning and adds lightning to your bites. And you basically have this like shark EMP that shuts boats off. And for me, this broke the fantasy a bit because you become this sort of like electric shark terror rather than like, for me, like I've talked many, many times on the podcast about my particular fear of deep oceans and leviathans and things like that. And I've also liked a lot of movies with this theme, like not just Jaws, which is the obvious one, but like Deep Blue Sea and The Meg more recently than that. It's a very schlocky thing, but I enjoy it. And part of the enjoyment is that it's ultimately quite a terrestrial thing that's, you know, munching people, basically. It's a bit like with Jurassic Park, where when they gave the dinosaurs superpowers, they lost something, right? As soon as they're literally like turning invisible and stuff like that, it loses something for me. And I think this game gets there with the later abilities, particularly for the electric shark, because it's like, I don't know what I am anymore. Like, I'm a sort of like, yeah, and like a digital sea beast. Whereas the bone shark, at least, its power is predominantly the power of the bone shark is physical, is what I'm saying.
You know where you are with the bone shark.
You do, and I can feel that somewhat. It's very silly, and it gets you through all of this in 6 hours, which is of just rolling around and munching things. There's a few things about like for example, on the surface, I thought this would be a great pip game because it's really fun to like terrorize the sort of, you know, like I say, GTA-ish kind of awful humans of this kind of like you know, decrepit late capitalist world that the game depicts, and it has, you know, it'll set up those humans in a funny way and make sure that you know that they're assholes, whether they're kind of preppy real estate developers buying up oceanfront property and reselling it for a huge profit until you leap out of the ocean and flop down suburban, like manicured pathways, hiding in the swimming pools to regain your oxygen bar, and then leaping back out to like flop down the street to murder more people with your big chompy jaws, and then shark ulting triumphantly back into the ocean. You know, that's really fun. The reason I think that's something people would enjoy as well is, but the other side of it is you are leveling up a lot and getting a lot of your resources by munching fellow sea creatures. And it's not gratuitous, but it is very bloody. And I think is kind of befits the subject matter. It is kind of nature, you know, red in tooth and claw. They've done some sound design that is just like, I know why they did it, but Jesus Christ, like when you kill a tortoise or a turtle, there's like this kind of squeeze pop sound, which I can only describe as like, it's extremely satisfying but awful. Like it's a clever bit of sound design because I think that is satisfying for the shark, but me, the human piloting the shark, feels a bit like sorry for the turtle. And it's not like, it has, I think, a kind of it's nudging towards an environmentalist message at the base of it, but you are also a huge asshole. And the one thing about it that did make me genuinely uncomfortable is you do get into fights with other sharks of various types, and then ultimately they're killer whales. There are apex predators in each zone. So after you've cleared out some of the kind of sort of fish population of the zone, the apex predator for that zone will show up, which will be kind of themed after the main predators that you encounter in that zone. And like initially these are like they've decided to like theme them, and so like the first one is like Rosie the Riveter but a crocodile. And then the third one is like in this oceanfront golf course zone, and it's a mako shark with a golf ball for an eye, and you're like, whatever. And then later in the game, like it's literally I've forgotten the name, the whale that Free Willy was based on, but
Orcas.
mean.
Yeah.
I mean the literal whale. Like
right.
You fight it in a SeaWorld enclosure that you can get into.
Oh, for fuck's sake!
To fight a whale. And weirdly, I didn't get Ocean Willies at any part of this except that part. Apparently, I'm afraid of deep swimming pools. That was my discovery. I also want to give a shout out here to friend of pod, Paul Scott Canavan, who was afraid of oil rigs, and now thanks to him, I'm afraid of oil rigs as well. Anyway, and then anyway, I don't want to spoil the last one of these because it's also extremely dumb. But when you're fighting these other creatures, they're the only creatures in the game and that have like limb damage. So if you bite a person, their leg will sometimes come off, and they'll usually be dead at that point, or they'll be bleeding out. And for some reason, that's kind of cartoonish and funny. But they've stepped wrong with the shark and whale specific locational damage, because as you whittle down their health bars and munch on them, their fins and tail will eventually come off, but their attack profile doesn't change. And so they'll still be swimming around and doing stuff as if they were fine. And what this means is every fight against another shark or whale ends with you fighting a kind of bloody lozenge. Also, they shout and scream and yell. There's a lot of like sharks roaring, which I know they don't do, but it's like so fish can scream. That's the other thing I've learned from this game.
What?
They're not always. It's quite well done, but it's sort of like you'll pipe something and it'll go like ah, and it'll be like a marlin. You like? I don't think they do that, but fuck it. That is, I think, genuinely a little bit distressing. And I think if you are a nature lover and you love sea creatures, then that would be enough to actually put you off the game. Like, it's all in this context of like hyper-violent grotesquerie that I think it doesn't ruin the game. But it was it would be the reason that, like, if Pip wants to play it, I would suggest she play on my save file and just go have the fun munching people side of it, and then not bully the turtles. Eventually, you do get an upgrade that makes other creatures ignore you, so you're not getting other fish attacking you, and that helps a lot with that.
Yeah, I think the thing about nature though is that it is kind of, it's not like that as you've described in this extremely silly game, but like an orca will fuck up a shark.
Oh yeah,
like a family of orcas move into a region of the ocean near a coast, and all the sharks just fucking evacuate because killer whales absolutely just munch those things.
Yeah, right.
So if you're actually thinking about the wild world, they're all eating each other all the time, and it's grotesque and it is bad. And this game is obviously a slapstick sort of take on what it's like to be a shark, but I think it's hard to be sympathetic.
Right.
So,
yeah, in some cases, yeah.
In that context,
yeah, you can't sympathise with a screaming fish. It's just...
Exactly.
They're going to get eaten.
It's like, because the narration is occasionally peppered with real facts that are actually genuinely quite interesting about sharks, and then also complete bollocks. So like you go up through growth stages. So you go from like a pup to a teen shark to a mature shark to an elder shark, and so on. So you become very big indeed. And I think when you become an adult shark, it says, the narrator says something like, the shark has now entered adulthood, which means greater financial responsibility and less freedom. And like, and it's so stupid. Like, anyway, the thing I would finally want to say about it is like it's such a kind of modest production. Like, it's quite a big world, but they've populated it with obviously repeated activities and to some cases repeated obviously fish, and definitely repeated collectibles and things like that. There's a lot of like individual silliness packed into that. Like, you can find SpongeBob's house because why the fuck not? And it goes in some very specifically very silly directions. But I think ocean games particularly are so great for hiding cool things in, like, and Easter eggs and things. And it's clear that their, Subnautica is the perfect example of this. It's clear that their budget for this or their scope for this doesn't extend to that really. Like, I'm almost worried that's a little bit of a spoiler, that there isn't much more to discover than it appears on the surface. But it feels like a little bit of a missed opportunity because I think there's genuinely quite a special game here where, in addition to all this really daft core loop stuff, you're also being rewarded for just exploring the sea. Like, that's the other half of the Echo the Dolphin kind of analogy, where that game also had a lot of a simple core loop in a lot of ways, but also felt kind of very genuinely exploratory. This doesn't. It has that Ubisoft thing of ultimately making every zone feel somewhat the same. There are deeper oceans later on and bigger fish and bigger boats, and they need bigger boats and they get them, and it does make that joke. But actually, I think at this particular time I was kind of in the mood for a game like this. It's so strange and just makes its point and then ends. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
very uncharitably, the first time I saw this game, I thought it was a kind of YouTube bait, a bit like Ghost Simulator, something like that. But it sounds from what you described like there is actually some fun there to be had. That is, I
think someone had a vision for this. Yeah, like it's not badly written by any means. It's genuinely funny at times. It feels like it's sort of kind of nasty in the way that Naughty's BMX games are nasty. You know what I mean? It could also be a Demolition Derby game, but you're a shark. Like, it's in that kind of cheap thrills kind of category. It's not prurient at all, really. And actually, it does have heart, and I like that about it. But it's like I said at the top of this, that like it's the definition. It feels to me like the definition of a rental. I think what that translates now is like it's such either a perfect Steam sale game, or given the way things are moving, it's like it's one of those games where if it shows up on your free list for something like Humble Monthly or Epic Game Store, or which is I think it's exclusive to Epic at the moment, or Xbox Game Pass or something like that, what I would say is this is the one that you download, right? Like a lot of like 6 out of 10 games pass without necessarily being worth 20 gig or whatever it would take to get them downloaded. This is one that I think you do download because if nothing in that premise puts you off, because it's just very fun to be a bone shark and to bone shark around.
Yeah, I think it's like I'm going to be annoyed at myself as I say this, but it's really annoying to compare games to cinema, but B-movie,
definitely,
is a comparison I think that applies here.
Yeah, it is, and I think its other great influence is Sharknado, which is in that category. Right. Like the shark on land stuff is definitely in that territory rather than any of the other ocean movies I mentioned. Like, it's. I think you said nature's gun. It's more like you're kind of nature's chainsaw, and you're just sort of going places, doing things. Like, it's definitely in that category. And like the other thing I would say, it's got good NPC barks for when people are being eaten, which is
fantastic.
Because they have to have, people talk a lot about the thankless job of game writing being like writing 400 ways to someone to scream grenade. But actually, from playing this, I think the job of finding 400 ways for people to scream, I'm being eaten by a shark, which someone actually does shout, must have been fun, because it's good. Basically, I liked it. It was like, I have to say, I played it all in like a couple of days, and this was a week and a half ago now. So while things were lockdown awful, but not kind of truly shocking as they have been over the last couple of days, and at that time, I want to say in that context, it was a really nice reprieve from that particular set of psychological conditions. I don't know if it would necessarily fulfill the same role right now, but I think kudos to Tripwire for making a game no one asked them to make. And just
nature is returning.
Exactly. Humans are the virus. Bone Shark. Marsh, I believe you have additional takes to dispense.
I do. Yes, actually, it's sort of related to what you were saying about playing a soothing game, a respite game. Because when things did take a turn for the truly bleak over the weekend, I couldn't really face going back and playing Stoneshard any longer, for obvious reasons. But I retreated basically to games that I considered to be my happy place, which have sort of been nice, soothing experiences in the past. I remember in the wake of the 2016, probably the Brexit vote, I went and played The Witness for the first time, and that was a very restful experience. But also played Fez. I think actually, on reflection, Fez might have secretly and slowly become my favourite game of all time. I didn't realize this until coming back to it now for maybe the fourth time. But it's just it's an astonishing piece of work. But it's just amazing to me how holistic an experience it is, how attentive it is in every aspect. And it's really, it's just rare in general to find a game that is just such this brilliant kind of unity of purpose, that everything has been so considered, that every pixel, movement, sound, and reference and joke is all pulling in the same direction. But it's even doubly more rare, I think, for that level of consistency and effort to have been applied to a platformer. Because I think, even the greatest of Mario games, they are in some sense quite throwaway in that the pleasures are manifestly rooted in the joy of movement, in the joy of platforming, and yet in Fez, I don't want to say that it becomes truly profound, but I think it really builds without any kind of ostentation or pretension into something really beautiful.
I don't think it's wrong to say it's not. I think it is profound, based on the way you talked about the game before, Marsh. I associate Fez with Cave Story a bit, but actually Fez has things to say about the structure of the universe, which is a fucking crazy thing for a platformer to do. And I remember us having a conversation years ago, in fact, on this podcast, and which we turned into a video, and I think that summed up some of the kind of almost transcendental themes that are present in Fez, even in spite of its apparently constrained two-dimensional form.
I think the sort of takeaway from it is it's not there's no kind of explicit philosophy that it's putting forward, unlike The Witness, which I hope I'll get to, but
Sure.
It does just do things in describing, it has two different endings to the game. I know I've talked about this before, but one sort of pans down and down and down until it kind of elegantly and quite playfully describes the kind of smallest quotient of matter that can exist in this beautiful kind of beyond the infinite sequence. And then the other ending you get is it pans up and up and up until you see a sort of elegant visual representation of the multiverse. And I don't think that it has anything particular to say about those things, but
it's just let's celebrate the universe.
Yeah
Just let's celebrate the reality we're in, which is joyous.
It really is. It is. There's just it's rarely frustrating as a platformer as well, and it's just a joy to be in that world. I'm surprised that nobody's taken on the gimmick and done it elsewhere. Because, just to briefly explain, Fez is a puzzle platform which is set in a 2D world, which undergoes this sort of moment of spatial revelation where this sort of malformed creature called Gomez, are suddenly gifted the ability to rotate the universe and reveal that it's actually in 3 dimensions. But you're only able to move when it's locked down to 2. But this gives you the kind of ability to sort of collapse depth, and platformers that look far apart in one sort of orthogonal viewpoint can be rotated so that they appear side by side in another. But like that, I mean, the game is a long game, and it has so much variety within it in the way that it approaches that that language. I don't really know why other games haven't sort of dipped their toe into that and just stolen it.
I just think like very few studios are sophisticated enough to actually take on that challenge in the way that that game did.
Yeah,
that's like a very generalist and possibly stupid thing to say, but I'm not sure like who could do that better.
yeah. I mean, it has been done. It's just I suppose. I mean, I don't think anybody would necessarily do it better or more exhaustively than this game. But I mean, I'm surprised that nobody's tried just to repeat it.
Sure.
But the other thing about it is the soundtrack, which is already one of my sort of like favorite pieces of music to listen to. But it's just the way it's woven into the game. I mean, most soundtracks sort of convey an aesthetic, or you know, maybe optimistically they mirror the player's actions or something like this. But I don't think there's that many games which are just so synchronized with the world and the things in it in a way which sort of talks about the technology with which it's constructed as well. It's just such a literate piece of music, so kind of discursive of gaming and its history. And I know I'm sort of just jizzing uncontrollably at this point, but it is, you know, most games are just about, especially platformers, especially chiptune. You know, it's mostly about delivering banging tunes for you to bounce to. But this is it's just another level of artistic depth, really.
But there's this moment when you actually your little dude puts on the fez for the first time, which gives him the revelation of like, oh my god, there are more dimensions, and that allows him to traverse into you know, actually, you know, rotate levels and stuff. And it's such a kind of, it's like a sort of ascendancy, like that. The music for that, where it's there's no beat in it. It's just like purely like escalating chords that result in an almost like choral finish. That is, it's almost like it, like that sounds dumb, but you know what I mean. Like that is what it's like.
Yeah.
Like it's like oh, he's actually seen beyond reality and actually become something else. Yeah. This tiny little 2D character, and that's such a wonderful thing about Fez that I've not had in many games at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's good, isn't it?
It is really good. If somebody hasn't played Fez, like, there's absolutely no reason not to immediately go and do it.
Yeah, it's fucking great.
But the other game I wanted to talk about was The Witness, which is also a sort of a puzzle game. It's more directly a puzzle, to use the Tom Francis taxonomy. It's a puzzle game from John Blow and his team. I forget the name of the larger development studio, but it's set on an island. It's a beautiful island covered in a singular kind of line drawing puzzle, the parameters of which are sort of pushed and pulled in an almost exhaustive way. And it was, and like I said before, I played it in 2016, and it was just this perfect refuge from what was an awful time. Yeah. And both of those games just feel like the perfect place to be right now. And the Island of the Witness is just so gorgeous and restive. Yeah. I tell you what, it reminds me a lot of Port Mirion. I don't know if you've been there in Wales.
I have. My grandfather helped build Port Mirion.
No way!
Yeah,
what the fuck?
That's fucking awesome.
That's awesome.
It's. I mean, Port Mirion is like it was built. I mean, was it? No, it wasn't built for the set of The Prisoner, the TV series, was it? It predated that. But it has always been this sort of place of folly, right? It's not. I mean, people.
Yeah,
no, in an architectural sense, like they are literally architectural follies. Like, they're not necessarily entirely places for habitation or places with a purpose. They've been designed architecturally just to delight, and it's this weird sort of eclectic mix of weird buildings. I really get the same vibe from the Witness Island, but it's also like deserted and peaceful, and sometimes it seems like it's been deserted for centuries, because there's these crumbling ruins, and other times it feels like it was deserted moments ago because there's like a sliced apple resting on a plate somewhere. And I just love the fact you can, and the audio is beautiful and just evocative of being on this gorgeous sunlit island. I love that you can just fucking run everywhere at the speed of like a galloping horse as well. But I mean, most importantly, that the puzzles sort of occupy enough of my brain that it just quietens down just the continual buzz of pure terror that is now obviously our natural state as humans.
Reality.
I like I think you maybe have actually outlined what I see as your perfect form of entertainment there, which is to gallop at the speed of a horse, but in a context with real literary credibility.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, I would like to gallop at the speed of a free and beautiful horse, but I would also like to be in James Joyce's Ulysses. Like, that's your vibe.
Well, it's interesting you say this because I sort of wanted to talk about the more philosophical aspects of The Witness, which on the first time I played it, I sort of dismissed because you can play it as this pure puzzle game, and it is really just one puzzle after another, and it just rings out every possible way of using these puzzles. But it is attached to a larger philosophical thing, and I kind of feel like it's unlike Fez, which is just the whatever profundity there is in Fez is completely integrated in what Fez is, whereas I feel like The Witness, it's very kind of a bit of a dichotomy. Like, there's just this relentless sort of puzzle sequence, and then aside from that, there are sort of quite bluntly and external big ideas, which are delivered through quotes from philosophers and scientists of the past, video clips, and some little fictional notes as well.
So, Marsh, did you find that the philosophy of the game actually binded with the puzzle structure?
Well, yes and no. I mean, no, because the first time I did it, I didn't really connect the two things. I mean, I understood at a surface level. There's obviously a relationship between puzzle solving and the ideas of endeavor and intellectual discovery that are otherwise, part of that sort of.
And also, almost like interpretations of nature into intellectual paradigms. So, for example, the symmetry puzzles you do for rocks very early in the game on the water, it's almost like just transcribing a beautiful thing in nature to quite a profoundly rubbish version intellectually, but somehow it creates understanding. I don't know. I was kind of curious about how you experienced that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it goes in a lot of different places, and it just talks about a lot of different things. And I think this is a weakness of its presentation, is that it's the lack of structure makes it feel like it's just a lot of different disparate ideas that aren't necessarily coming together into a single sort of argument or even sort of direction. And I think that was my kind of resistance to it, was compounded by the fact that I didn't really connect with Braid, which was Blow's previous game, at its philosophical level. Because although I kind of got what it was getting at with its narrative, I felt it was just sort of needlessly obfuscatory about it, and although the ideas were interesting themselves, the language that was used to kind of frame them dramatically was just a little bit kind of tawdry and overwrought. So I just didn't give it the time the first time I played the Witness.
I think my experience is like, it feels like a fucking GCSE test.
Which one? Both or?
Oh, both. Yeah, both definitely. In the do you have the intellectual and educational bandwidth to actually eventually interpret this? And it's like, fuck off. Like, honestly, just fuck off. Like, I mean, yes, I do, but why should I devote my attention to you? Why should I devote my attention to this piece of art? When there are many people who are working much harder to actually communicate things.
Well, yeah. I mean, it goes back to the difficulty thing, right? I mean, do you trust this developer to have something interesting to say, and how much effort should you put in finding out that they don't?
Right.
But I think they do. I think there is something interesting. So this time I took a different approach. I was just, because maybe because I wasn't playing it to finish it, maybe because I was playing to return to it, and just return to the space. I was just able just to kind of sit down and just watch the little video clips and things without a sense of impatience that it wasn't going anywhere. And in the end, it felt more like there isn't really an argument. It is more about there is just a bunch of curated stuff. And each of the individual things was, this time to me, sufficiently interesting in and of themselves that I had the patience to sit through it. But do you want me to tell you what I think it's about, if I've got it right?
Yeah, please do, actually, because I'm confused about it.
So this is the thing. I don't think it's really singular in any way. It is just this kind of whirlwind of different ideas. And I think it's intentional that it doesn't set on a single thesis, because ultimately it is about the pursuit of truth. Yeah. And ultimately it complicates the idea of whether that pursuit is worthwhile and what truth is. And so it can't really ultimately sit on a single kind of point of view. And it presents things which are contradictory. But truth seeking is a sort of noble endeavor. That seems to be like a major theme of it. And then that game, and this is the way it connects most tightly with the game itself, because it's sort of saying that games are a way of helping us explore and flex our truth seeking abilities, right? Yes, I know. Yep. but and also
shark.
The noble truth of the bone shark, nature's chainsaw.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. And also, so there's truth seeking is noble. There's different kinds of truth. There's like scientific, objective truth, which is perhaps you might consider more true in some ways than interpretive subjective truth. But in fact, interpretive subjective truth is often more useful to us. But then it starts to sort of complicate that, because it says, well, truth isn't a puzzle. Like, actually, reality is not a puzzle. Reality is reality, and sometimes we just apply our pattern recognition skills to situations that don't warrant them and come out kind of reeling in conspiracy theory and conjecture. And also, art isn't a puzzle. The value of like great art isn't that meanings are cleverly hid within it necessarily. It's that it communicates often. And then kind of like its sort of ultimate kind of philosophical denouement is to sort of undercut itself altogether by presenting counter arguments about not only our limitations to even perceive truth, but also whether it will make us happy, and
even be useful.
Yeah, there's like clips of spiritual leaders in that. I forget who they are. I wasn't familiar with them beforehand. Who suggest that actually you should stop trying to seek things. You stop trying to feel like you need something else, because you are actually whole in yourself. You're capable of being content, and everything else that you feel is just the noise generated by your needy animal body. And I think actually this is really the only point which I think is straight up fucking bullshit in the entire thing. I strongly disagree with that. For one thing, I don't think I actually have an innate ability to be content, but also I think they've got it exactly the wrong way around. Like, I mean, I don't disagree with their end point view, but if I were to make the argument that one should stop needing as much, one should stop seeking as much, it would not be that we are already whole. I would say it's because we are innately imperfect and incapable of completion. And this is genuinely something that I dwell on a lot. And specifically, the phrase I heard, I don't know anything else about the philosopher Raymond Tallis, but I remember listening to him on a Radio 4 program maybe 15 years ago or something like this. And a phrase he used really stuck with me. And he described the human condition. And I know this sounds really pretentious, but he calls it the human wound, a life of incomplete meanings. And that just you know, when you hear an idea and it just sort of slots perfectly into a hole in your brain, you're like, oh yeah. I mean, that is our nature, to be like these partial beings that can never answer the questions that roil around inside of us.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm on a roll here, man.
Yeah, I mean, please go ahead if you want to.
And it just feels like this is the motor that drives so much of human nature, from our inquisitiveness to like our acquisitiveness, like our desire for money or power or sex or religious belief, or, you know, people desiring booze or drugs. And even if we don't have like the articulacy to understand why any of this is happening to us, I think we're all looking for the thing, you know, that one fucking thing that will finally fix us and make us complete. And none of those things will ever do that, because we have a hole in our soul and it cannot be filled. And that's you know, that's my thesis. I think we all suffer from a sort of metaphysical dysmorphia.
Can I leap in here with maybe to complicate that slightly? Is that all right?
Sure.
I mean, I appreciate this is a different podcast at this point, but I think that trend's in the right direction. But I don't agree that someone's pursuit of intellectual or spiritual wholeness, and maybe you're right, the fact that either for some or for all that is impossible is quite the same thing or part of the same system as our acquisitiveness or our kind of search for material completeness in that way. And I think the evidence for that is that I would argue that the fear of scarcity and desire to shore yourself up and feel safe from scarcity is definitely extremely human, but I also don't think it's necessary. And I think it's a very particularly entrenched part of our culture that we valorize, and that we see as natural and default, but it isn't. And it's interesting to be having this conversation in the light of video games. I think the thing about The Witness is it doesn't expose you to any danger other than this kind of existential threat of having the donut hole in the middle of the world pointed out for you. The rest of games, not to be too broad about it, but a lot of, games give people ways to quickly leap on to usually an acquisitive kind of treadmill and extract all of the value from that thing. This is the only most tangential kind of fucking thread I could use to link Maneater to The Witness. But it's, that's a thing that I was capable of consuming and that fit my desire to just complete some tasks and be told a story and acquire things and finish the armor sets and get all of the points and leave. And it taps into that part of my brain. But I also think that is that part of it is massaging something that's fundamentally cultural and that is built into the way we structure our political and economic systems and everything else, rather than something that's essential to the human condition. That would be my argument. But I think one of the reasons that is so easy to bolt and make feel default in our culture is because you're probably right. It is related to the otherwise searching emptiness at the heart of the human, the human being, or at least. Yeah. For us.
What were you going to say, Tom, before I steamrolled you in my bullshit?
Oh no, it certainly wasn't bullshit. I was just I was thinking about how why we seek to fulfill ourselves with fiction and with devices like video games or movies or television, as though that's supposed to fill some sort of hole, and as though that is surely a misguided quest. You can gain catharsis through that, or understanding, or kind of just entertainment. But I think for video games, it's like a mission. Can it actually fulfill that program?
Well, this is sort of it may be the fact that John Blow has devoted his life to trying expressing giant philosophical things in line tracing puzzle games is sort of the art in itself. That's so that is subpar. Frankly, that is a subpar expression of philosophy. He made a fucking stupid line tracing game about important things. Why didn't he just make a game about the important things straight up?
He might not be able to. He might not be able to gamify it otherwise.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. So put it all it's like what we were talking. I was talking about with Eva. if you've got something to say, fucking say it.
Right, but this is kind of what I find interesting, and I think one of the things games do is they make you feel kind of they give you a safe environment, and this is true of play, not just video games or games more broadly. They give you a safe environment in which to interact with challenges and narrative structures and ideas and emotions and dramas and stuff that you don't encounter somewhere else. And I think in a broader sense, they give you kind of mastery over, or the promise of mastery over, a little environment that is there for you, and for you to explore that you don't have the rest of the time. They're, sanctuaries in that way. And I think that's often how they fit into people's lives in a way that actually goes above and beyond what other kinds of entertainment can do. And that's one of the causes to their appeal. And I think it's also one of the reasons why it's so strange, and evokes such extreme reaction in people when the sort of the sanctity of those environments is challenged, or when it is or when the games themselves don't feel safe in that way. And I think Receiver is a good example of this, because as we talked about it earlier, I think we all are uneasy about the things that it raises, right? Tom, you sounded uneasy about some of its connotations. There's the pleasure of the thing. It is this safe environment. It is this way of playing with something. But a part of you, an intellectual and a moral part of you, can't fully accept that is totally safe, because it has because it has so many profound real world consequences.
But the game does speak to that as well,
right. It makes you feel uneasy, and therefore you have an uneasy relationship with it. Because that's kind of what games do. It's kind of what we were talking about, right? Like, your Steam library is just a list of different kind of environments to dip yourself into, and you kind of expect them all to be entertainment in a very particular way. And then similarly, I think this is one of the reasons why this is maybe to spin this point. I appreciate we're fezzing this thing. We're just zooming out and out and out. I think this is one of the reasons profoundly why business model and the is so evocative in why it receives the react when changes to business models, or business models that are perceived to be exploited, or changes in them, get such a visceral reaction from games audiences. And it's because money, and the way that you gain games, and the way that money is extracted from you in games sometimes, is probably the most profound way in which games tap into the fundamental lack of safety people experience in the real world. Does that make sense? Like, the thing I'm trending towards here is that capitalism is the problem, and I suspect it probably is. But that's why I think it upsets people so much, because the promise of these spaces is that they are free of those constraints, or that they reconfigure or recontextualize them in a way that puts you at the center of them for the only time in your life. And as soon as that gets taken away, as soon as a game moves to a store where people don't feel like they could download it or they can't afford it, the real world comes crashing back in, and all of its inequities and all of its problems and all of the ways in which that you aren't centered. And yeah, and that I think is why it's such a kind of powerful thing. And I think there is something in this, and in the fact that what I think this identifies for me is that the job of games most of the time is to be an escape, and that's why it's natural to have a tricky relationship with them, with our reactions to them in a time like this. And it's a strange time to be working on them. It's a strange time to be talking about them. And yeah, this shark needs to flop back into the sea now because I'm running out of air. But but yeah, I think it's impossible not to have a complicated relationship with the idea of escaping at a time when you also have moral responsibilities in a lot of different directions. And I don't have a solution to that other than maybe capitalism is the problem, basically.
I don't think we should feel ashamed about escaping into games. I think that's the entire purpose of the medium, and we should enjoy them as much as possible. And as long as we're paying attention to our loved ones and everything else, then actually just dipping into these worlds and feeling good and just having a little bit of a holiday is a fucking cool thing, and a great privilege actually, because lots of people can't have games consoles or PCs, etc. So yeah, I think it's valuable to recognise that as a form of escapism in this time.
can't believe I was talking about a shark an hour ago.
We all need to go off and bite into a big turtle. Get our energy back.
Delicious turtle.
Majestic.
Crunchy.
Shall we do some questions?
God, yes. Some ideally smaller questions. Our first question comes from Abdul Rahman, who writes, "Hello. In episode 281, which is a long time ago, it feels like, Chris mentioned at the start the replacement for PUBG Mobile in China, which is called Game for Peace, which is essentially a friendlier version of the game. We, on the podcast, then went on to talk about adding the option to Mortal Kombat so that the winner could say some nice things or help their opponent instead of horrifically dismembering them. Now, a year later, friendships have been added to Mortal Kombat 11, which can replace fatalities with nice cutscenes of the winning character doing something playful, like playing jazz or making a painting. Said cutscenes don't feature the losing character in any way, which is a shame. This is a nice addition. So now that we all know the secret influence that you guys have on the games industry by simply imagining things on a podcast, what features would you like developers to add to their games, perhaps years later? Thanks for the pods, Abdul Rahman." This is one of two questions we've got today about our ability to predict the future. So, what would you have inserted into games based on your random imaginings now?
I don't know what to do with my newfound power.
It's almost too much, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's almost too much.
Here's a prediction. I've got a prediction for you. I think that id Software will recognize that people play Doom for the music and formally integrate a rhythm action mode into that game.
Ooh.
Basically just accept that it's dancing. And
Tasty.
we'll all move forward hand in hand with Mick Gordon into the sweaty future.
I think that performance capture will continue to become more and more advanced, but the scripts and the the writing will not become more advanced.
That's not a great wish for the future, though. You could use your power for good, Tom.
Oh shit! Oh, this is supposed to be optimistic, isn't it?
I think the idea is to eventually be right. So Tom's not on a bad track here.
Oh shit! If I want to give a positive version of this, is that we would have like a version of Frozen in PC gaming.
What does that mean?
Where the characters are just like so clearly expressed in their dialogue that they are adorable and often stupid, but still very entertaining. And that's enough for a film, apparently. But apparently it's not enough for a game. So I'd like that to be enough for a game. That is a fucking dumbass answer I've given to this question.
I love that. I like to make this more optimistic. I want a game with the credible performances of Frozen. And I don't think that's a bad thing to wish for. I think Josh Gad is very entertaining as a human. But like I don't know. I think this might be your finest moment because I think you were told to raise the bar and you just picked it up and you put it at 6.
That's totally right. I don't know what I was doing there really. I was trying to be really enthusiastic, but I think I made the entire medium worse.
And this is why you need to go work for the people who do remastered versions of Kingdoms of Amalur.
Look, I'm gonna fucking work at that studio any minute if they call me. I'm there.
Good. And I mean,
what the fuck did I say? I can't even remember.
I don't know. There's no way I can follow it though. Nothing I'm going to say is going to be better than that.
The next question will take us even further into the unknown. It's from Discord member Nix, and she writes, "Dear Creighton Cobra Mark III," which is a good one. Bit of an elite joke there. I've been catching up on old episodes and found something very spooky. Last June, in episode 286, during a discussion of Soren Johnson's take on some MOBA mechanics, Alex identifies him as an old world creator. Soren confirmed in his recent pod appearance that they only changed the game's name to Old World in February or March of this year. And then she's provided links to the evidence. Proper question time. Sorry, hang on. So uncanny, right?
Good lord.
what else might this modern oracle have predicted? So this is the first question: is what might Alex have been right about?
Wiltshire.
Yeah.
Well, we never know now. He's died of crows.
Oh yeah, he's being killed by crows.
Yeah, well, he
didn't predict
didn't
that,
see
did he?
coming. Yeah. Actually, he did. He was shouting about them.
Wasn't a very advanced warning though he gave.
Or his message today, Dead of Crows, was the prediction. In which case, we have acted far too late. So Nick's actual question is: with Dota's international battle pass being released, do you have any options about rewards? In this case, particularly fancy digital hats being accessibility gated. And the best way to understand this without diving into the specifics of the battle pass is that they require you to want to play every single part of the game and to explore every single aspect of the game and to be happy playing every part of the game. And that's not necessarily how everyone feels about it or how everyone uses the game. I think this is a really interesting point personally, because I think, battle pass mechanics, which Dota pioneered, are all about paying in to an extra reward stream that attaches to the things you're already doing in the game, but it also makes the assumption that you're playing the game in a particular way, and that's kind of interesting. Like the obvious answer is then they obviously become less appealing to those people, and there's a financial incentive for the developer to make them appealing and therefore make them appeal to every possible use case. But that's not what people do, and I think that's honestly a missed opportunity. Like there's it should be, particularly the international battle pass, which is conceived as a celebration and as a fundraising tool for the international to some extent. It should feel like a celebration, and therefore there's basically no reason to gate its rewards in any way, really.
So, sorry to interrupt.
Go on, yeah.
But I wondered what your particular, and you and Pip's relationship is with Dota at the moment, in terms of as like a thing you play or watch.
I at the last couple of years, because time is going very quickly now, I have mostly come back from a couple of months over the international. So this is the time where I will return to it, and the new battle pass is very appealing, so I'll usually dip back in, learn enough about the game to be able to follow the international, which is, this year's international is delayed indefinitely due to COVID-19, so
Sure.
It's a little bit of a changed period.
Yeah.
And it's probably the reason I haven't let back in straight away. And then Pip will normally kind of watch the international, basically, and that's her engagement with Dota. And now she doesn't play. But I also play much less than I used to.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Any
other thoughts on... Sorry, go on, Tom.
So from a, I like watching the international. I tend to do it every year, but I don't think I will this time. So it feels like something has changed.
Yeah.
And it feels as though the integrity of the game has been diminished, but I'm not sure quite how. I don't know if what you feel about that.
It's continuing to change and evolve. I don't think I've noticed a change in its integrity necessarily. I think, I genuinely don't know. I'm not sure exactly. I haven't dipped back in to the extent that I'm really sure of where the meta's at or anything like that. And I haven't watched Pro Dota in a little while, so I don't know how healthy it is. But I think I've seen it change so much that doesn't really worry me. In fact, it's kind of exciting to go back and find out where it's at.
Sure.
Obviously, if it's super boring at the moment, then might not watch the international. But the good news is there's no international to watch. So
yeah, right.
Our next question comes from John, who writes, "Hi there. Am I suffering from lockdown madness, or is there sometimes a different version of your opening theme tune which you substitute in occasionally? Keep podding, John."
John, though. John, no.
I almost want to leave this one a mystery. And the truth is that we have one cut of this particular track, Clam Baked by the Mandibles, that you made as the intro cut MP3 for episode 2, and that we have been using ever since. So not only do we not use the same music, we've been using the same MP3 for 7 years.
Although the new recording setup in these COVID-19 times has occasionally meant that I've had to reduce it to a mono track rather than a stereo track. Which, because we're actually using a different piece of software again today, because Zencastr had a conniption, but Zencastr only supports mono recording, and so so maybe Your sensitive ears have detected a very subtle difference.
Yeah, or
you're mad.
No, it's the same.
It's the
same. The next question is, the next two questions are related, and so we may have to maybe get through both of them. They're also great. Will writes, "Hello, Box and Prybar. At the start of episode 325, you lamented the 90s kid-esque writing of these quote-unquote wholesome games. I can see why it wouldn't appeal to you, oh ancient ones, but it does appeal to me. I was born after 2000, so I never experienced that life.
Hell.
I never experienced that life, but I sure wish that I had. This fabricated nostalgia has a certain influence on my preference in music and games. Anyway, in your childhoods, did you ever wish to be born a decade or two earlier, or is this born in the wrong decade phenomenon new to my generation? Thanks, Will."
Such a good question.
This might be my favourite question we've ever received, because nothing has ever caused me more pain than this.
I think he's probably right, actually. I think I probably did yearn, but I didn't yearn for real time periods. I yearned for to live in fictionalized, idealized worlds. Like I very, very strongly wanted to inhabit the world of Wind in the Willows when I was a child. And I still...
No, I'm not laughing at that. It's just an incredible, very specific thing. You want to do a horse running free.
Well, I think you've previously commented that my personality is pretty much exact hybrid of Moley and Badgers. So it does figure. But there is something about the... I don't know, when is Wind in the Willows set? It's like a 1930s, 1920s sort of world.
Yeah.
But there's something kind of unthreatening and pastoral about it. And I probably also like Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and the Children of Green Know, all these books that were set in an undangerous time, even though there's peril in the stories. The kind of the time period itself feels quite, I don't know.
I had exactly the same thing with a series of books that my dad gave to me. That actually, I don't know what they're called at all, but there's a badger and there's another dude, and they just sail on canal boats and get into trouble. And it was like such a reassuring and like sort of rural, comforting adventure. And that stayed with me forever, that idea. To the extent that like I went out into the rural places in England and did hikings and things, and it was uncomfortable and cold.
Yeah.
And actually, nature doesn't give a fuck about you. So, it's a fascinating sort of like contrast between this pastoral optimism and the reality of actually being in nature, which I enjoyed.
See, so I was surprised that you said you thought this was new to Will's generation, because I definitely felt like I was born in the wrong decade when I was a teenager. Like, profoundly. Like, when I was 15, 16, I basically exclusively, I don't know if I've said this, either to you guys as friends or like on this podcast, I exclusively wore like flares and like pretty high-heeled snakeskin boots and paisley shirts, and I had my hair down to the middle of my chest, and I just listened to 70s and 60s prog.
Oh, fuck, I did that as well.
Wow.
I remember I used to wear those flared jeans, but it wasn't the same as you, Chris, because like this was a skater thing.
Right.
I got mega into the skater thing at that particular era, and I had a t-shirt from a particular bazaar in Birmingham that does that sort of thing, that normally sells bongs. I had the massive flares, jean flares, and a skateboard, and I could not fucking skateboard to save my life. So, sorry to interrupt, but like...
No. I think, that feels closer to the generation that we were, though, to some extent. But I think there's still definitely like a desperate nostalgia for things. Like, it wasn't until I got older that I realised all of the weirdness of being like a 15-year-old kid in 2002 who, like, sort of, like, didn't only related to things that Led Zeppelin had said, or like listening to like King Crimson and Wishbone Ash and like raiding my dad's record collection. And definitely that phase lasted a fair old while, like until college, basically, as in sixth form college. And so I do very profoundly relate to this sense of attaching as a teenager to a previous culture and only understanding the very most surface elements of it, but clinging to them desperately because in my case, you just really don't like new metal.
Yeah,
quite reasonable, really.
Everyone else is into Papa Roach, and you're not, and so
in my case, it was just attaching onto an American idea of skateboarding.
Yeah, I mean, in that case, it's the cultural transplant thing. It's like desperately wanting to. I also remember desperately wishing I went to an American high school because I loved Buffy, and I just assumed that was what going to school was like in America. I went to a kind of a all boys school in the south of England, and I hated every minute of it. And on television, on Channel 4, when you got home from school, was the same people your age, but who were secretly played by beautiful 20-year-olds. In some cases, 30-year-olds, I think, in Nicholas Brendan's case, whose high school life involved like hanging out in the library, fighting monsters, and seeing a new pretty cool 90s band every night at the Bronze. And so I desperately wanted that as well.
Yeah, it feels like
which is side nostalgia, I guess.
Yeah, it feels as though Harry Potter has kind of barged in to this realm and sort of made people think that boarding schools are good.
Right. Yeah, they suck.
They fucking suck, and they actually really fuck people up, and it's terrible. But and also like it just like the image it gives of Oxbridge, like it's just really.
Yeah.
It's just wrong.
It's not like that. I'll tell you that right now. Yeah. I'll tell you it's not like that.
Yeah. It's just wrong.
Yeah.
So I think like glorifying that private school. Sorry. For some reason they're called public school in this country. I don't understand.
But it's easier to call it private school.
But like that's that being glorified, it feels like cultural damage. I would say
maybe. I think also like I think it is. I think if it. Sometimes I think that those interpretations are so far removed from the real thing that they're almost harmless as fantasy. Maybe that's not quite the case. Maybe they do damage. I was thinking about this because Pip and I have watched like every single post-Vampire Diaries vampire thing on Netflix, and there's a fucking lot of them. And that whole genre is about a certain kind of wish fulfillment for teens, basically. It's very informed by YA fiction, and it's quite good fun because it's schlocky, but very rooted in a particular set of tropes that have to be ticked, particularly in YA fiction that has a female gaze, which is all about you have to be the outsider at your boarding school, but your boarding school has to either also be full of angels or vampires, or both, or werewolves. And these are the three different boyfriends that there are, and this is the order in which you meet them, and there's infinite potential for articulations of that stuff within that genre. And I really enjoyed that stuff, partly because it expresses something really fun about what another generation is growing up with as their kind of little like, God, I wish my life was like this touchstones. I would definitely say that yearning is universal, right? That it's just interesting in this case to hear it directed at something that we lived through and that wasn't like this. You know what I mean?
Was actually quite boring.
Yeah. Yeah. The next question is related to it. I might as well plow onto it because it has some really good answers to this. Robert writes, "Hi all, in episode 235, Marsh made an offhand comment about 80s nostalgia, wondering why people who never lived through that time seemed attracted to media portraying it. I noticed myself strangely longing for this time period when watching The Breakfast Club for the first time a few days ago. I was born in 96 and grew up in Germany, so I don't actually have a personal connection to this culture. I believe the main aspect that resonates with me are the very pure relationships and deep bonds between the children and teens that children and teens in these stories have. These in turn arise from going through extreme experiences together, like a whole weekend detention, standing up against bullies in a gravel pit, or escaping from monsters in a cave. The environment facilitates these, for example, mobile phones and the internet not being available, cities containing or bordering large natural environments, and especially adults being indifferent or ignorant of what their children are doing, which results in children being far more independent. Personally, that's why it's not specifically about the 1980s, but those general circumstances. I had the same feelings when reading Stephen King's It, where the majority plays out in the 1950s, or playing Life is Strange, which is a more modern setting, but at least Max's mindset seems more familiar to a character of an earlier period. Contrast this with today's children and teens who are always connected to everyone, and particularly to their parents, and honestly spend much more of their time inside. This might be reductive, but to me it only seems logical that this generation gravitates towards media which shows characters having adventures and relationships which are so much rarer today. Anyway, has a game or other piece of media ever triggered a longing for a time period that you never yourself lived through? Thanks for reading, Robert. I feel like we've actually answered the question that's attached to that, but I think it's an amazing observation.
That's the best pairing of question and then answer that we've had, I think, in this podcast.
That's fucking awesome. So, do you guys, what era, if you were to be transported, what decade would you transport to?
It's hard to say because, although the Wind in the Willows or whatever is appealing, I know it's a fiction, so I wouldn't ever go back to those eras. Those are fictions without peril, without class, without poverty, really. And in the Wind in the Willows, the poor people are kind of bad. They're all the weasels and the stoats that live in the wood and speak with Cockney accents and have bludgeons and assault the manor.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think that's the thing. Is as you get older, you realize that I think those fantasies become harder to maintain if you have a critical mind at all for the history and for the past. And because I have a lot of fun and really enjoy the trappings of Agatha Christie, for example. That particular vision of the Poirot version of England, and we've had a lot of fun with this on Little Grey Cells in the past. It elides a vast amount. And it has its own methods of interrogating that world through Poirot's eyes, for example, and making those characters faintly ridiculous. But it's also such a comfortable place, and it shouldn't be necessarily. And so I would probably happily spend time living in that version of that period in history, just because I find it kind of sweet and charming in that particular depiction of it. But I wouldn't actually go back there under any circumstances. And the flip side to this is that it's obviously possible to play in those spaces, right? I have been to balls and events and things in my life, 20s themed jazz era events and parties and things, and that itself is always a slightly uncomfortable experience because it's fun to have fun with the past, but you also elide so much in doing it. And that's a tricky thing to navigate because it is fun, but it's also an active, I guess, deliberate, critical elision of things that are uncomfortable in order to have a good time. And is that good or bad? I don't know. I'm still talking. Our last question is very different. Comes from Takuna, who writes, "Hello, Crete and Malta, whatever. Would you swap out your first-person perspective forever in favour of a third-person perspective, like in video games where you can control its position, but you can only zoom in as far as the near side of your head? You can zoom out as far as you usually can in games, though. I definitely would." Takuna. I definitely wouldn't.
This would have been useful when I shaved my head over the weekend.
Oh my God! Really?
Wow.
Yeah, it was a mistake. I will wear a hat basically for 2 months, I think. In other regards, no, I don't want to see myself. Why would I want to see myself?
I think I like painting Warhammer, and so if I was stuck in third person, I would have to hold the Warhammer behind my head in order to paint it. I'm going to volunteer right now to continue using my eyes to see.
Yeah, likewise. And earlier today, I posted a picture of 4 of my most proudly painted Warhammer figurines attacking a series of bunny rabbits wrapped in foil made of chocolate, and I rolled some dice to figure out who would win between these two vicious combatants, and it turned out that the foil bunnies fucked them up super bad, and that was delightful. It was really good, and then I ate them.
Been in lockdown for a long time.
Yeah, I ate them. I just like peeled off that foil and ate them.
That is all the that is all the questions we've got time for. If you would like to send us questions for future episodes of the Crate and Crowbar, please email us questions@crateandcrowbar.com. You can also tweet us at Crate and Crowbar and find our Discord community on Discord via a link that's available on our website at crateandcrowbar.com. Thank you again to all of our Patreon supporters and everyone who supports the podcast. You can find out more details about that on patreon.com/Crate and Crowbar. Once again, hope everyone's staying safe and taking care of themselves and others and as well as you possibly can be. I've been Chris Thurston.
I've been Marsh Davis.
And I've been Tom Senior.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yeah, this is me saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20.
Wow.
That's counting to 20 with the Crate and Crowbar.